There are tales that linger at the edges of folklore, strange sightings that defy classification, meaning they're not quite a man and not quite a ghost. They are something in between. So tonight we're heading to 1970s Scotland to explore one of UK's most unsettling urban legends. Who or what was this figure that terrified residents with his twisted smile and bizarre, almost ritualistic appearances? Was he a spirit or a trickster? Perhaps a time slip? Or maybe something far stranger? Let's unravel the unsettling encounters, the psychological theories, and the paranormal possibilities behind one of the strangest sightings you've probably never heard of. This is Supernatural Signals, and tonight we're tuning in to the Gurning Man. Let's begin our investigation by going over one of the first reported incidents of the Gurning Man. It all started late one night in 1976. Under the pale glow of a moonlit sky, two teenage girls walked home from a party through the quiet streets of Glasgow. The hour was late, but the road ahead was surprisingly bright and lit by both the street lamps and the watchful eye of the moon. However, as they approached a small stretch near Cross Hill, their laughter slowly faded. Because under a pool of artificial light, they spotted a strange figure that stood motionless. He appeared to be a man, seemingly in his 50s, clad in a black leotard and nervously shifting on his feet, like something wasn't right and he was planning something. His face was twisted into a haunting grimace. Equal parts grin and grimace, like pain and pleasure blended in a way that didn't make sense. And from him came strange, guttural noises, grunts and low snorts, animalistic and out of place in the quiet night. Terrified, the girls picked up their pace, glancing only briefly at the man's contorted expression. Then, in the blink of the eye, when one of the girls turned back, he vanished. No longer there, and no footsteps. No retreating figure in the distance. He was just gone. When they reported the encounter to the police, they were shocked to learn they weren't the only ones. Other sightings have already trickled in, all describing the same uncanny man, twisting and twitching under the cover of night. Now, if this incident left room for doubt, what came next was far harder to explain. Because this time, the Gurning Man wasn't just seen on the street. He was inside someone's home. This event just occurred a few nights after the teenage girl's chilling encounter. A middle-aged woman living in her semi-detached house with her husband and children was suddenly awakened in the middle of the night. At first, she thought the strange snorting sound she heard was just her husband snoring. Something annoying, but not alarming. But then she realized the noise wasn't coming beside her bed. It was coming from the end of the bed. Fighting off the creeping dread in her chest, she slowly lifted her head from the pillow to scan the room. And there he was, lit only by the faint glow of the moonlight spilling through the curtains. She saw a man standing at the foot of her bed. He was rubbing his hands frantically against his chest, his movements agitated, unnatural. And his face, it was twisted into a wide, terrifying grin. Not joyful, but more maniacal, like something out of a waking nightmare. She let out a scream so loud it jolted her husband awake. He jumped up instantly and slammed the light switch, flooding the room in a warm light. But the figure was gone already. Much like the prior incident, there was no trace of him left. No sound, no sign of forced entry, and nothing was out of place. There was just silence and that sickening feeling of somehow being watched, or of being chosen somehow. Now, it could be very easy to label this as something as a night terror or sleep paralysis. But here's the thing. This sighting took place mere days after the teenage girl's run-in with the same figure and barely 100 meters from their location. It could be a coincidence, but it marked the beginning of a pattern that would grow harder and harder to explain. Because these certainly weren't isolated incidents. In fact, they were only the beginning. Between 1976 and 1979, there were 17 separate reports of the Gurning Man in Glasgow's Cross Hill area. 11 of those encounters happened on the street, usually late at night, between the hours of 9 p.m. and 4 a.m. However, the other 6, those could be considered far more disturbing because they also happen inside people's homes. In 2 of those instances, the witnesses were so convinced that the figure was flesh and blood that they called the police, certain that they were in the middle of being robbed. But when officers arrived, they found no sign of break-in, nothing was stolen, and of course, no one else was in the house. To this day, no clear explanation has ever been found. The Gurning Man left behind no fingerprints and no evidence, but just fear and conclusion in his wake. And then, just when it seemed like the phenomenon had disappeared, years later, he returned. In September of 2017, a young woman reported an unsettling encounter in Queen's Park, just adjacent to Cross Hill, where the original waves of sightings took place. She was walking home from a friend's house late at night when she noticed something between 2 parked cars. At first, she couldn't make it out, but as she got closer, her heart sank. There stood a man, elderly, perhaps in his 70s or 80s, dressed in dark clothes. His arms flailed erratically, and his face was twisted in a devilish sneer. And then came a noise, a bizarre, almost animalistic snorting, just like the reports from 40 years prior. Shaken, she hurried away, convinced she had come face to face with something not quite human. And she wasn't the only one. Another sighting came shortly after, again in Queen's Park. This time, a group of teenage girls noticed movement behind the trees. When they turned to look, they saw an older man, his face contorted in an unnatural grimace, wildly rubbing his chest and staring at them. He made no attempt to approach, but he didn't need to. The grunting noises and his grotesque expression sent the girls fleeing. And since then, silence. There hasn't been any news reports and any explanations, just a lingering feeling that whatever or whoever the Gurning Man is, he may still be out there, watching and waiting. So who or what exactly was the Gurning Man? Some believe that he might have simply just been a man suffering from a psychological or neurological disorder. Perhaps someone with a condition that caused facial contortions or compulsive behavior. This would explain the strange expressions, odd movements, and eerie sounds. But even if that were true, how did he manage to enter homes undetected? And how did he vanish so quickly from public places without a trace? When the Gurning Man seemingly reappeared in 2017, witnesses noticed that he looked significantly older, perhaps in his 70s or 90s, which supports the ideas he was human. But again, there's no evidence and no identity ever confirmed, and no physical proof left behind, and no arrests or answers, just fleeting encounters and frightened witnesses. And despite all the terror he inspired, it's important to note he never actually harmed anyone. Yes, he left people shaken, disturbed, and deeply unsettled, but physically unharmed. And maybe that's what makes it even more unnerving. He didn't need to hurt anyone to leave a lasting mark. You know what makes this case so unsettling to me? It's how easily it could be explained. especially if you're a skeptic. It's tempting to just chalk it up to sleep paralysis or maybe a disturbed man wandering the streets, maybe even someone dealing with neurological or a mental condition. And if that were the whole story, it'd be easy to dismiss. But when you start connecting the dots, that's where it gets weird, and that's where the inconsistencies creep in. How did he vanish so quickly, again and again? Where's the proof that he was ever really here? Why were there so many reports, all with the same disturbing details, yet all from people with nothing to gain by coming forward? That's what I love about the supernatural. It's like this cosmic puzzle where you're constantly looking for gaps in the logic, places where the rules just don't fit. You tell the story to someone who doesn't believe in anything beyond the physical world, and they'll probably just shrug and say, it's easy explained. But for those of us who look a little deeper, the supernatural detectives out there, this one doesn't let go so easily. And personally, I love a good mystery. Alrighty, if this story gave you chills or made you start connecting dots of your own, please make sure to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you don't miss the next strange signal. Be sure to follow me on Instagram at supernatural_signals. And as always, stay curious and stay tuned into the supernatural. Thanks for watching.